Thank you. Before we just move on to our next panel, carbon literacy has come up a few times today, and actually we've got a session tomorrow where carbon literacy features. It's the online session, and I'm not going to sort of steal the thunder of our speaker on that, but there are some carbon literacy solutions for maritime on the way. So if you haven't registered for tomorrow's event, or you want to know what time it's at in terms of that particular slot, speak to any of the team and we'll help you get registered. Right, so now we're going to look at Net Zero Region. We've got a really interesting panel coming up, which is chaired by Stephen Hugo from the North East Times. He's the editor of the North East Times, previously business editor of the Northern Echo, really super well respected journalist in our region, and environmental responsibility is one of his super passions. So can we all please welcome Stephen? I'm sure Stephen will introduce the panel. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you for that introduction. I don't think I've had such an introduction in a long time like that. So honestly, it wasn't anything pre-planned. I'll have that wherever I go next. That was fantastic. Welcome to the next session. This one, as you can see from the screen, you might see it just hiding behind the chairs there, is titled Imagining a Net Zero Region North East. I will call out the panellists one by one to come up here, and then we'll get cracking. So Tom, you're first on the list. Tom Nightingale from Equinor. Do you want to jump up and wander down? And we'll move it along. We've got Ben Murray from Harland Wolff. We've got Mark Gibbons from Drax. And on the screen, I believe, we've got Eamon. Is that right? Eamon's on the screen? Yeah. We've got Eamon Ben from DFT. There we are. Look. You guys get comfortable for a second. So, as I mentioned there, the title, the topic of this discussion for the next 45 minutes or so is Imagining a Net Zero Region for the North East. I start with a slight apology. I've just followed Greg's. So I know we had a break and we had lunch, but if anybody's sort of thinking now about the next break, if Greg's has kind of got your stomach from a little bit, I'll try and get through the next 45 minutes as quickly as I can. As the intro said there, my name's Steve Hugo, I'm editor of North East Times magazine. Net zero, as you can imagine, is something that we've written countless articles on over the last year, countless the year before, the year before. Next year and beyond we'll do exactly the same. It's a big topic for us. Today is a slight extension of that. Delighted to be here to unpack and unpick what this means, what this topic means. We've got a fabulous group of panellists with me to help me do that. I'm preaching the converted in the room when I talk about net zero and its impact on everything we do. I mean, we're on a port today. Don't need to talk about the maritime sector and the impact of net zero and the importance of net zero on that. Whether you pick a newspaper up, if some people still do these days, and you read the news that way, or you watch it on the television, or you're on social media, you're reading blogs, you're in a boardroom, you're working on corporate strategies, discussing it over the dinner table. Net zero in some way, shape or form is intrinsically linked. It affects everything we do. You have to look yesterday with British Steel's announcement down on Teesside, with what they're doing with electric arc furnace plans, which they say will transform their operations dramatically. Today with the King's speech as well, it came up there a few times, so it's everywhere we look. Like I say, today essentially we're going to try and unpick the topic that you see in front of you there, where we are with things, but also what's happening, but also what needs to happen. And as I alluded to at the start there, to help us do that, we've got a fantastic panel. I'm not going to introduce the panel. I'm going to go beyond sort of name and serial number. I'm going to ask the guys to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are, what they do, and where their skill set fit with this discussion today. So I'll start right at the far end, the person who's hiding from me the furthest away. I can just see in the lights. And we'll work our way left to right, sorry, and then Eamon on the screen will be the last one, then we'll properly kick off. So, yeah, if you want to...
So my name's Mark Gibbons, and I head the logistics function for Drax Power Station that most people know us as. I've been part of that business for over 10 years now, but my standing in the industry goes back about 25 years working in the power industry. And for about 15 years of those, I've had various associations with the Port of Tyne and with this region. So we're at a big turning point of the business at the moment, where we've moved from being the largest carbon emitter in Northwest Europe when I joined the business 10 years ago to, I hate to use the word journey, but everybody does tend to drag it out, to having a huge transition to burning sustainable biomass, sustainable wood pellets. And we're now in the next chapter of our evolution, looking at how we move to have carbon capture fitted to our plant going forwards to be able to operate as a zero carbon business.
Ben?
Yeah, hi everyone, Ben Murray. Great to be here, and thanks to the Ports Time for putting on a tremendous event so far. I think it's something I'd reflect on from last year, or even within the last 12 months, how much progress seems to be being made across the sector. And actually, without events like this, we don't get a chance to really showcase that and see that. So thanks for that, and well done. I've been with Harland the Wolff since May, the shipbuilder and marine engineering company. Before that, I was at Maritime UK, so I may have come across some of you in that role previously. And I think, hopefully, without trying to be too too boasting, I guess, I think one of the reasons I hopefully can contribute to today is over that period of time, I think we started to make some really good progress, whether it was around a national shipbuilding strategy, whether it was around free ports and the argument around how maritime can support broader national agenda items, whether it was around Eamon and his team and the work we did to try and get UK Shore set up and to try and get some of the funding flowing to the sector. So that's something that hopefully we can get into later. Just on Harland & Wolff today, many of you probably will have heard the company. We describe ourselves today as a 160-year-old startup. We obviously have our roots in Belfast, but today, having brought 4 yards out of administration, Belfast, Appledore, Methil and Arnish up in Scotland, at the time of acquisition, there were 45 people working for that company. Today we have 1,000, and we have a backlog of just over £1 billion. So we're bringing that business and that British icon back into play. And clearly, one of the key drivers for that is decarbonisation, both in terms of maritime operations, but also our role in enabling the energy transition, whether that's fabrication for offshore renewables or other forms of energy. So very much looking forward to the discussion, and great to be here.
Thank you. Tom?
Hi everyone, I'm Tom Nightingale and I'm the North East Stakeholder Manager for Equinor. We're a partner in Doggerbank Wind Farm, which is the world's biggest offshore wind farm being built off the coast of North East England, and we have our operations and maintenance base just up the road here in the port of Tyne as well. For any of you that don't know, Equinor, we're actually the UK's biggest energy provider and have lots of interests in other offshore wind projects, but also in low carbon solutions like hydrogen and carbon capture.
Fantastic. Do we have Eamon, is he?
I think there's a technical issue with Eamon at his end. Yeah.
Ah,
Oh, no, he's
as
here.
if by magic.
Yes.
There you go. Eamon, good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Oh, God, I'm huge, aren't I? I apologise, everybody. Hi, everybody. Yes, slight technical hitch. And I'm sorry to be joining you virtually today. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the point of view, I've got a parents' evening that I can't miss this evening, and couldn't make logistics work, unfortunately. But I didn't want to not join the session because it's quite important topic, as you can imagine. So very quick recap of who I am. I'm Deputy Director at DFT Maritime. So Ben very kindly mentioned UK Shore, the shipping office for reducing emissions. So I run that. That's the £206 million R&D programme, which is trying to accelerate the technologies necessary to decarbonise the sector. I also manage the domestic maritime environment team, where we're trying to develop and implement the policies and regulation necessary to help the sector get to net zero. This is part of a wider DFT Maritime Environment Programme where my colleague Sarah Francis and her team negotiate in the IMO on greenhouse gas, etc. So my background beyond that is I've been in the department for a couple of decades now, mostly on environment transport issues, so things like charge points for cars and vehicles, and new technologies and sustainable aviation, things like space flight, electric aircraft, flying taxis, etc., and drones in the aviation sector. So that's mostly my background. So I'll stop there because I'm sure everybody's keen to get to the panel.
No, Eamon, thank you very much. Yeah, we'll crack on. The format of this, there's a few questions that I'll throw to the panellists. and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. I should have mentioned that at the start. So I guess firstly, let's start at the beginning. Where are we with net zero in the North East? I mean, you've given some good examples there, guys, already about what's happening. Tom, I don't know if you want to kick us off with the Equinor hat on. Where are we in the North East, and what's going on, and some of the sort of big headline projects we can see that are right in front of us?
I think the North East has a huge range of really important projects, actually, to help us towards net zero, and some of them are actually really small, like hydrogen homes is a really good example as well. But then we've got some of the UK's biggest infrastructure projects in net zero, like Dogger Bank Wind Farm. It's costing £9 billion to build Dogger Bank, and it'll be the size of a power plant in terms of the amount of electricity produced. But we also have a big opportunity in this region in terms of decarbonisation because of all of the industrial emissions as well. So Teesside's a great area, and a bit further south, well, maybe not North East, but Humberside is a really important area. So this region will have a really important role to play, and I always like to say it's the epicentre of the energy transition. So maybe that's a good enough start. Absolutely, yeah.
Mark, maybe tell us a little bit more about what Drax is doing. You sort of touched on it there on the start about the work that's already happened, but to give us a flavour of what's happening, but also where we need to get to, because obviously this is, you use the phrase journey, I'm going to use it again. It's a long journey, it may be a never-ending journey, but just give us a sort of flavour from Drax's perspective.
I mean, Tom's touched on the synergy between sort of Teesside and the Humber that we're seeing at the moment, and we're actually blessed with some geology in this part of the world that is really favourable to capturing CO2. So a lot of the other projects that you see around the UK and globally are stymied by the ability to actually capture CO2. We have the potential in this region to be importing material in from European counterparts and be able to use that infrastructure not just to support development in this region, but to substitute for countries such as Germany that have made statements in terms of their own policies going forward. So really for us, we're waiting with the infrastructure and the plans in place to be able to be masters of our own destiny with our carbon capture plants that we'll be responsible for on site. But then we need the pipeline infrastructure and the offshore infrastructure to be able to capture that carbon. And you touched on the announcements around Scunthorpe yesterday. I apologise, I haven't heard the King's speech today, so if anything else has been said today, we've been in the room here. But that also offers opportunities for green energy, green steel. So it's not just about sitting here as one power plant in the region. It's about how large industry can work together and benefit from the synergies of pipelines that will allow certainly investments from an Equinor perspective, from a Drax perspective, from a British Steel perspective, Steelworks, to be able to work together.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big point, isn't it? Collaboration in anything, if you work together, it makes things easier. It should make things easier. Something of this scale, of this magnitude, isn't going to be done in a piecemeal manner, or one company going off and doing one thing, one going off in another. There has to be that joined-up approach, doesn't there? I mean, Ben, what's your take on the sort of kind of industry we're seeing at the moment, or the landscape that we're in? Everybody wants to run, but obviously we can't all run. You've got to walk and take your time. What's feasible? Because we wanted, when we were here in the last one there, procurement guy wanted things yesterday. We want to see things happening yesterday, but obviously it's timely. So what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an authority on the North East in particular, owing to where our yards are, but I think the reflection I can offer is probably similar in that from a national perspective, I dare say a few years ago there was a lot of hot air, I think, across the piece. A lot of people were sort of saying they're going to be experts in X or Y, but I genuinely think in the last few years, 4 or 5 years, we've started to get a little bit of robustness and a little bit more focus. As we've heard from a few people here today have got really specific plans, strategies with timescales, with targets and so on. So I think we've seen that. I think we've seen that be mirrored somewhat by partners, whether it's colleagues in this room from academia, from that sort of nexus of industry, academia and government, or government themselves. We've started to see, it obviously needs to go further, but a recognition of the need to provide targeted intervention for maritime decarbonisation. We've seen that, whether that's from the UK government, whether that's other governments, whether that's even at a local level, local governments supporting funding applications, whether it's the regulation we've seen internationally, whether it's the regulation we're seeing and we'll see more of, hopefully with incentives too at a domestic level. But I think we've also started to see companies look up from their silos and work with others. So some of that's been, I think, required by funding rounds. But what's been really interesting is seeing that culture and that behaviour that's been required through funding then be borne out when the funding's not there. So we've got a consortium at the moment to build green tugs. There's no funding. I tell a lie. There is a funding application associated with it, but there wasn't initially. But that's really positive, and I think that allows us to start to focus on the behaviours we need to see, the skin in the game we need to see, and hopefully that will be rewarded by success and by outcomes. But all of that we've seen over the last few years, all of that we're seeing today, we all know isn't enough. We need to accelerate that, do more of that, and I think be more focused as well. There's been a little bit of a let's what's the phrase? Is it hope a flower, water and hope a flower, 1,000 flowers bloom, whatever it is. I think we need to be a little bit more targeted on what it is we do, and I think that's where regions come in. So one of the things we're doing with colleagues in the Southwest, in Northern Ireland as well, is being really clear. What can we actually move the dial on from a regional perspective? What assets can we bring together to co-invest? Because we can't get away from that. We need that co-investment, and I think that's where we need to go next. And I think we're seeing the early signs of that, but that's something we're particularly keen to do in those areas we think we can really genuinely move things forward, because otherwise you're just doing it for the sake of it, and you get found out and you're not actually going to achieve anything. So that would be my reflection.
No, very interesting. Eamon, I saw you scribbling notes down there. You were nodding away as well at a few points. What's your take on this from a DFT perspective? What have you been scribbling down on your notepad there that you can tell us?
It's my shopping list, actually. But no, in all seriousness, I agree with a lot of the points made, and it's really encouraging, I think, to hear about all the collaboration and opportunities that are being seized, both particularly regionally, that we've just heard. And I do agree with Ben about that. Having that collective voice is really important, be it to drive projects or be it a collective voice when talking to government on what do we need and where do we need that support, what are the barriers, and how can government help those tackle those barriers. So that's really encouraging. I think this is exactly the kind of conversations I think that ministers really want as well, because when I talked to the Maritime Minister, Baroness Veer, or the Secretary of State, then they recognise that a driver for a lot of the work that we're doing is to meet our obligations when it comes to net zero and reducing greenhouse gases. But the outcome that they really, really want here is about growth, and that's just not national growth and jobs and everything else, but at a regional level as well. So there's an awful lot of other work going on outside what we do in my team. On things like maritime clusters, and there's a maritime cluster in the North East, and there's lots of others developing across the UK as well, and they're really important for some of those things that the panel was talking there about collaboration and having that voice, etc. And it's going to be really, really important if we want to get to net zero both nationally and in a regional way.
No, very interesting. Just the idea of talking with one voice, it's something that comes up a lot from my perspective when we're working on the magazine, just within this region alone, talking about one regional voice, which is not always easy. So the idea of creating that one voice around this area, it's so important, isn't it? I wonder, to sort of go a little bit off-piste from what we discussed in some of the questions beforehand, but one of the things just listening there sort of cropped up to me was, can I talk quickly about skills? Tom, you might be able to kick this one off for us, the work that Equinor does, because we're talking about moving towards net zero, the things we need to do, the things that we have to change, etc., etc. Obviously, we need people coming into businesses to help drive that, to help deliver that. Can you give us a sort of an idea of what Equinor, for example, is doing and the ways that you're evolving the business to make sure that journey is on track?
Yeah, I think Equinor, in terms of offshore wind, not just Equinor, but anyone in offshore wind has an obligation to invest back into the local communities. And one of the reasons we picked Port of Tyne actually was their ethos towards community engagement and the great work that they do as well. I think that when we talk about investment outside of London, that we just heard as well, the ports are a fantastic opportunity for levelling up. Yeah. They're in the locations that need the investment already. So South Tynesyde's a great example here of an area that's been deprived and is now benefiting from offshore wind. What we've been trying to do is then think about the skills that are needed to support that growth in the future. So our strategy at the moment is about trying to have an impact on every stage of the learning journey, from primary school through to being an employee that's working with us and that can be upskilled for example, through our apprenticeship levy or our other training programmes. And actually, sometimes people think we're like a Nissan with, 60 apprentices a year, which we're nowhere near that. We brought 3 apprentices this year. It was only supposed to be 2, though, so 50% increase on the plan, which I was really pleased about. But when you've got a company like Equinor, that's an international energy company, you can provide really great opportunities. So our 2 offshore wind technician apprentices last week were in Haugesund in Norway on top of our substation for Dogger Bank B, which is the world's biggest unmanned platform for offshore wind ever. So this is a great opportunity, I think, that we can have to be able to upskill people locally. Those 2 apprentices are from South Tyneside as well. So they're getting a really great experience now within our business, and we do the same for graduates as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Mark, I guess it's a similar story with Drax, isn't it?
Yes, I guess we're somewhere between the two, really. We're more than 2 or 3, but less than 60. But I think we've traditionally brought apprentices into the business in an engineering type of role because we've been a heavy industry as a power station. And that's opened up great opportunities for people as electrical engineers and develop skills for the future. What we're seeing today, though, is those opportunities are coming in for different people. So as an example, I've got a graduate apprentice working in my team now, which was just a way of bringing somebody through, and we'll give them the corporate learning for how biomass and how supply chains work, because those are skills you can't pluck off the shelf.
Yeah.
So actually, it's thinking about apprenticeships in a different way. They're not just a way of taking traditional skilled manual labour, but it's a way of opening up other opportunities. I think, largely as you say, it supplements graduate schemes, and we're seeing the cost of education is so high for people now that you miss out on so many good people because they drop out during university courses.
Yeah.
Whereas the apprenticeship schemes offer paid employment, stability, and tend to favour people that are local and regional to the employer, and that also fosters them staying in the region and developing their careers, hopefully with us, but if they leave us and move elsewhere, they're likely to stay within the region. So that skill develops, and the success breeds more success.
How much going forward as well is there going to be a need for employers and companies to work even closer with education to really kind of tailor what is going to be happening, what an employer wants? Because it's all right having people come out of the pipeline, but if they're not necessarily holding the skills and the knowledge and that kind of base level understanding, then an employer's not getting what they want, is it? So is there a need there for closer kind of relationships going forward? Again, Eamon, I can see you nodding on the screen there. Is that something?
Yeah, I think so. I was nodding because I was in a different part of the UK, engaging with one of the other maritime clusters, and a lot of this came up. A lot of skills came up, and what was really encouraging was the way that the organisations in that particular region were working together to deliver career programs or mentoring programs or diversity initiatives. And I think there's something there about the collective power is greater than the individual power to do a lot of this stuff. And I think there's some really good examples of where that is happening around the country. And there was one, I was talking in the margins to somebody from one of the, it was actually Maersk, and one of the colleagues I was talking to there was saying that he was off the following day to go and talk to somebody else in a different company in the maritime sector to talk about their career. So, and that was a mentoring program set up by the maritime cluster. So I think there's an awful lot of work that I think can happen regionally when it comes to the skills required for the future. And I think that having those clusters to sort of coalesce around can really bring out some positives. There's perhaps something about the sharing of that information and what works well between clusters. And I know the colleagues certainly back at the department is trying to facilitate some of that. So where good things are happening, say in the Liverpool region or Northern Ireland, then can that translate to elsewhere across the UK and sort of share those learnings? Because we appreciate that clusters are at a different level of development. But yeah, it's really encouraging when you peel back some and get to the nitty gritty on some of these things that are happening. It's really quite positive. There's a long way to go, though.
There is a long way to go, yeah. As we said at the start, yeah, we're on the start of this. I'm just looking at the clock there, conscious of time. So one of the next points we were going to discuss was maybe sort of, you've already given us a heads up on some of the things you're doing, but maybe kind of a bit more detail on some of the projects or the work that your respective organisations have already carried out or are carrying out in terms of case studies to to give us an idea of some of the transformation towards net zero and I guess the successes of that and where you are with it and where you still need to go. Is there any kind of big hitting ones you can give us that we can take away today? I don't know who wants to jump in there first. Anybody?
I'll start if you want to carry on. Left to right, or right to left as you guys sat there. So I think one thing that we're looking at directionally at the moment is we've talked a lot today about companies that have net zero targets and have statements of achieving things by 2030, 40, 2050 respectively. And it's a recognition that there are some very, very difficult areas hard to abate carbon that you will not eradicate from your supply chain, regardless of where we're sat in the room. It's probably true for everybody that the last 10% will just be not economically viable. So we're in a fairly unique proposition of trying to structure a negative carbon business, which allows us to then participate into voluntary carbon markets and the trading of CDRs going forwards. So that's a model we're looking at very much around the UK, but we're also now looking at our investments globally to be able to provide high quality carbon removals, which I would encourage everybody in the room. We've started to see Maersk and Greggs and others mapping out their pathways. And that's absolutely what you'd expect businesses to be doing today, rather than having a strapline target, actually to start mapping out what are the milestones, how are you going to achieve these targets. And often there's some really good balance between nature-based carbon removals and then high-quality carbon removals. It's now a good time to sit down and challenge yourself and think about that. My colleague Matt's in the room here today, very much the area of our business has grown. I think we spoke in the car on the way up back. We've got 40 people working in your team now that are focused on that area of the business.
Oh, wow.
Now that's double the size of what that would have been a few years ago, which hopefully gives you an idea of the investment that we're making into that area of the business.
Oh, fantastic. Ben?
Yeah, I'm just going to get a plug for our apprenticeship program very quickly, which is 143 that we have with us now, which is, I mean, that's deliberate because we took those yards out of administration. We had to go from 45 people to where we are 1,000 now, and to be able to deliver programs in the future, you've got to build your own talent as well as purpose of mentioning that though is that that gives us an opportunity to hardwire some of this stuff from the start. So whether it's in training, whether it's through making people have an aligned and shared understanding of what we're trying to achieve, we've been able to build that in from the start. And I'd break, to answer your question, that into three areas. The first is in terms of our own plant and machinery, making sure we're electrifying some of those processes, as you'd expect, as the port's done very ably here too. Second, I think it's about being credible about what our offer is to the sector in terms of new build. At the moment, we're starting with smaller vessels, electrification. So we're looking at tugs. We're looking at scaling that technology through to larger vessels. Then we're looking at what there's a number of programs at the moment looking at SOVs in particular. And then on the final side, I think there's that. And obviously Tyne's very, very closely involved with this too, is enabling that wider energy transition. So making it clearer and particularly in the context of the forthcoming general election, talking to Labour when they're mentioning their green prosperity plan and they're keen on co-investment in green infrastructure. They want to suck as much of that supply chain activity to the UK, to local communities as possible. That's for us, particularly in Scotland, where we're talking about manufacturing jackets and other bits of kit. That's something that that's a long-term game, but positioning ourselves as best we can for that. And all of those have a slightly different strategy to realise those. Our own operations we can look after and we can partner and share. The working with customers and consortia on the new vessels, but also I'd extend that, the earlier discussion about retrofit. We're all very excited to talk about new builds, but there's a massive task coming down the track in terms of retrofitting vessels, and actually lots of us, there's a huge amount of work for all the yards and others that aren't operating at the moment to be able to provide a space for that, and that can be done in a collegiate way. And then that third one, everyone in this room, if we get this right with the supply chain, it's a huge prize, and that's something that we can work together on. So I think slicing it in different ways, understanding who you can work with and how and by when, I think is the process we're going through at the moment.
Fantastic. Tom?
Yeah, I'm just going to clarify, we don't only have 3 apprentices around the world. That's just here in Newcastle, but we have over 100 as well. So I think we've got some great targets too. We intend to be carbon neutral in terms of operations by 2030 and net zero by 2050, and we're a huge energy company, so that's not an easy task. We're also doing some great work around sustainability, especially in the oceans as well. But I think that sometimes actions speak louder than words. So one of the things that we did here at Dogger Bank was to make our operations and maintenance base net zero. And we did that by doing things like using timber for structural elements, recycled steel in our warehouse, whole roofs covered in solar panels, and we've got 20 EV parking bays. So this was a really great opportunity for us to work with the local supply chain in terms of the build as well. So lots of local companies are really proud about helping to build that, and we've won 5 awards so far, including the North East Net Zero Award and Sustainability Awards as well at the Construction Excellence Awards. And later this month we go automatically through to the UK finals for that. So it's just a great way of us being able to show that we want to bring that sustainability ethos onshore too, but that came at a cost. This was part of our business case. We had to go to the management team to get extra money for that base. I think when you're at the start of a project, it's sometimes easier. Retrofitting is much more difficult, but we were able to show over the life of the wind farm how important that investment would be, and how it will, a small step like that can still be really important to help us on our journey. So when we talk about some of the targets here, it all sounds very big, very difficult, but each small step along the way, I think, makes an important difference too.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I'm conscious of time. We are ticking on, so I'm going to jump to the last point on my list, and then I'm going to ask you to start this one off, if you could, for us. It's basically a bit of a wrap-up, but it's looking at the sort of next steps. So we've discussed various things today about what's happening and what needs to happen and where it's going well and where things may need to change. Eamon, from a DFT perspective, what are those next steps? What's the blueprint? How can we take those next steps forward?
So I was struck a couple of years ago at the sector sort of, I think generally everybody's on board that where we've got to get to. It's kind of the how, and there's I think a recognition that there's a period of action that we really require now in order to get to those targets that we've got as a sector and the UK as a whole. So the thing that's happening nationally that we're doing is, so we have something called the Clean Maritime Plan, which was published in 2019, which sort of set out that ambition and that vision with a couple of key steps along the way. But what we're trying to do is refresh that and build a little bit more of a structure and a roadmap out to that 2025 with some goals along the way for GHG greenhouse gas reductions. And that will provide a framework for the sector to really this is the trajectory out to 2050 that we've got to try and meet and reduce and become a clean maritime sector. The flip side of what we've got at the moment, which is at the moment we've got a little bit of the carrot, which is the funding from UK Shore, really important when it comes to demonstrating the technologies, not just that they work on the vessel, but actually that what are the OPEX challenges around new technologies on the vessels, what's the port infrastructure and the fuel infrastructure required and all of that, which is really important on the last question you asked, demonstrating that so you can then get investors. But we do need some of those sticks as well, for want of a better term. And the Clean Maritime Plan is going to set out some of those policies and regulations that are likely to be required to then help the sector achieve that. And we've seen some of that recently through the IMO as well on the international shipping scale. So we've got a piece of work to do to map what happens at the IMO level and what impact was that going to have in the UK, and then what do we need to do on top of that in the UK in order to support our domestic sector. So that's the main focus of our work at the moment, is to try and set some of that out nationally in our forthcoming Clean Maritime Plan refresh.
Fantastic. You drew some lots of nods from fellow panellists when you were saying that, Eamon. So just very quickly, does anybody want to add to that? Because I want to see if we can throw it open for a couple of minutes for questions. So has anybody got any final thoughts on the sort of next steps, or if you're happy to jump into Q&As, we can do that.
I guess just quickly, I'd say I think long-term investments and long-term partnerships are the key to making these changes. So we've talked about sort of flagship schemes and investments that's there for the near term, which is really positive to enable and to identify where we want to go. If I draw an analogy from where we are elsewhere, we talked this morning about the role of innovation and developing technologies. Ricardo and Lloyd's List worked on our rail wagons. Most people will probably have seen the images of our rail wagons moving our biomass around the country. We were able to invest in rail wagons that have a 40-year life, partly out of necessity, because we were changing our supply chain and we had to build the infrastructure. But at that time, Lloyd's and Ricardo managed to design what was the best wagon possible within the gauge on the railway to carry the most material. And we've now seen that through, and we've grown that fleet. And this is not just serendipitous timing with me being here today. We actually deployed a brand new set of rail wagons on the Tyne to Drax route last week, which was a further investment of 10 million in a final set. That reduces our carbon footprint by 27% on that route. So these are all possible because we've got a trapped supply chain where we're in control of that rail network. In the maritime sector, we don't have that. We have vessels that tramp the market, and it makes it much more difficult than Mercer's challenge, because the vessels that we're bringing in are the ones that are to work efficiently, have to be able to trade openly in the market. If we create a green corridor of material from the US to the UK and force an empty backhaul, we've created a massive inefficiency in the market. So at the moment, we need to work out how to unlock those long-term investments and be able to look beyond the next 3-year contract of affreightment or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that was an answer or anything.
No, it's
a longer-term perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic. No, I can see that we've got the mics ready out there. So has anybody got any questions to ask the guys? I've exhausted everything by the looks of it.
Whilst you're finding something to answer, I just make a point about long-term investment as well, which Bernie's got his pen there for the Clean Maritime Plan, is to think about procurement. In the UK, we have 150 vessels that the state procures. I know this is relatively niche, but it has wider benefits. There's 150 vessels that the state procures. If it procures those domestically, the supply chain benefit of that is significant. But you could also stipulate that you're going to test this fuel, that fuel. You're going to have to require the investment in this infrastructure or that infrastructure. So I know the amount of cash there is to support some of these projects is going to be constrained potentially going forward. So the levers the state does have, whether it's procurement, it's a different sort of stick. It's sort of a carrot and stick mushed into one, if you like. So how can we use that to encourage further investment? Because you can say to owners, operators, to yards, you'll get this work, but you'll have to the ratio of private investment has to be X or Y, and you can achieve that much more. So just a point there for how we can get that investment that was spoken about.
No, very interesting. Thank you. Do we have any questions? No, there's no arms shooting up in the air. So maybe it's time. Oh, I've got one. Ah, fantastic.
Sort of a question, and maybe not one sort of Eamon can answer, but yeah, I was just made aware sort of recently there was I think it's an RTFO scheme, I think for biofuel and usage, which I believe has been applied a little bit intermittently across sort of tidal rivers and non-tidal rivers. My understanding is it's out for consultation via the DFT at the minute, and that's going to move away from tidal rivers and just be sort of inland, so canals and things like that. I was just sort of surprised by the timing of it a little bit. I'm not sure if you have any background at all on that, Eamon, or if it's a conversation for another day.
I'm afraid I don't have any background on it right this moment, but do reach out to me, and I can put you in contact with the RTFO team here at the department if you have any specific questions. But so yeah, more than happy to do that.
Awesome, thank you very much.
I think it was one of those ones where there were perennially no maritime use cases, and I think the select committee, when it was looking at 2050 last year, one of the recommendations was to consult on that. So that may be where it's come from, but I know it wasn't particularly well used, if that helps.
Okay. Any further questions from anybody? No? Oh, you've exhausted the topic, guys. Well done. Well, thank you for your time. Oh, well, there you go. Just very quickly, thank you for your time.